Good morning, everyone. I'm Matt Smith, IIT's Communications Director. Thanks for joining us for the first session on the final day of Virtual InsureCon. We hope you've enjoyed all the sessions and have found the programming useful. Virtual InsureCon and many of our programs would not be possible without the generous support from our lead underwriters. So thank you to IIT's strategic partner, Texas Mutual Insurance Company, Union Standard Insurance Group, UFG, Allied Trust, Central Insurance Companies, Service Lloyds, Liberty Mutual Insurance, Safeco Insurance, Imperial PFS, Travelers, State Auto Insurance Companies, Nationwide, Swiss Re, and IIT Advantage E&O and Markets. We're excited to have Steve McKee back with us for the entire day. He'll be hosting 3 more sessions after this one. Each one explores the different phases of the disruption cycle. Following this session on the acceleration phase, Steve will cover the maturation phase at 11, the saturation phase at 1, and then the commoditization phase at 2. IIT Executive Director and President Marit Peters will join us following the last presentation for a few announcements, so I hope you'll join. You can still register for all today's sessions at iit.org/InsureCon. If you can't attend a webinar or want to share one with colleagues, recordings are available on the IIT website at iit.org/InsureCon. Today's recordings will be available by the end of the day tomorrow on that same site. As I mentioned, we have Steve here with us for the entire day. For those who haven't heard Steve speak yet, he is the co-founder of McKee Wallwork & Company, a nationally recognized marketing advisory firm that specializes in generating new momentum for stalled, stuck, and stale organizations. He is the author of When Growth Stalls, How It Happens, Why You're Stuck, and What to Do About It, and Power Branding, Leveraging the Success of the World's Best Brands, which has been called the definitive book on modern branding. Please join me in welcoming Steve McKee. Steve?
Thanks, Matt, and hello, everybody. Can't see your smiling faces, but I trust they're there. And hopefully you're being very productive today. I'm very excited for these 4 sessions together. I think we're going to learn a lot together. And it was fascinating taking all the results from the survey that we did and then breaking them into the 4 categories and having a look at how they all break down. So I do appreciate the time. I would encourage you, if you have questions, not entirely sure if we're going to have time at the end of each segment for questions. Some we might not, but I'll try to get them in. So if you have questions as we go, please submit them through the GoToMeeting function, and we'll try to get to them. And hopefully it'll all make sense, and it'll be terrific. So I want to begin with this quote that you may be familiar with by now, if you've heard me, from Sir George Buckley about the core of every business dying, which is kind of an odd thing to be saying when we're talking about acceleration, right? The front end of the disruption cycle. But it's something important that we want to keep in mind, because this is the fact that it is a cycle is something we want to remember. And the time to begin preparing for the future is always now. Also, one of my favorite people, professors, strategists, Richard Rummel, he's been called the strategist, which is hard to say. And this line about the most important element of a strategy being a coherent viewpoint about the forces at work really underscores what we're talking about today. That as companies are in and industries are in the different modes of the disruption cycle, understanding what's going on in those modes and what's coming in the next mode is very important to you strategically. So we're also focused on running our businesses every day as we should be. But sometimes it's helpful to take a step back and just kind of look around and gaze at the horizon, or the storm that might be coming, so that we can make our plans accordingly. And hopefully that's what we can accomplish together today. So just by way of setup and reintroduction, for those of you, we have the diffusion of innovations curve here, which everybody's pretty familiar with, that every innovation goes through these 5 phases, where first innovators adopt it, and then early adopters, early majority, late majority laggards. It's become sort of a standard thing. We all understand it in business. And what we've done at McKee Wallwork & Company is taken the company life cycle and sort of tracked it along with that the acceleration and maturation modes tend to coincide with innovators and early adoption. And then as you get into the latter stages of the market, you get more into saturation and commoditization. And we've simply recognized that that's a cycle, put it in the form of what we call the disruption cycle, and have found studying it to be rather fascinating and extremely helpful to our clients. So we did the insurance industry disruption survey among each of you, fielded it earlier this year, pre-COVID. Probably most of you, if not all of you, saw the overall results presentation. If not, I know that's available on demand. And we had a terrific level of participation with 359 respondents overall. Each of you should have received, those who participated, should have received your report by now. Hopefully you've had some time to spend with it and process it and think it through. And we want to talk today about the various stages. So 28% in the acceleration mode. I don't know if everybody on the call is in that mode or if you're just curious about it, but that's what we want to focus on today as we break down the phases, or for this first hour at least, is this acceleration phase, which represents 28% of the cohort. Last time when we presented the overall results, I challenged each of you to look at your report and ask a few questions of yourself. Why are we where we are? How do we get there? Where are we going? And what are the ramifications of that? So again, hopefully you've had a chance to absorb a little bit about where you are and the kind of things that you're dealing with, and we'll get into phase by phase today. It's kind of like having kids. You know, I want to say, oh, the acceleration phase is my favorite, but I'll say that about each of the four because they're all, you know, it's like choosing a favorite kid. You can't. They all have a little different personality. But I think this is a really great quote. You know, entrepreneurs in new market resemble children in that there's much they don't yet know. They operate in utterly strange but fascinating environments where discovery and surprise are common. It's so true. And acceleration mode, if you've ever been in it or when you've been in it, is the good old days. I found this photo online of that guy with that handmade sign back there. I actually think Amazon had about 600 employees at this point, so it wasn't a small company, but it was totally in acceleration mode. And this is the fun of it. I mean, he's got a dumpy old computer there and you know, a tangle of wires on the floor. And at the time, you're like, you know, I wish I had enough money to buy a pizza. But it's the good old days, if you will. And there's a lot going on inside a company in acceleration mode. These are the questions or the statements from the disruption cycle survey that tend to correlate very highly with companies in the acceleration mode. And you can see everything from, we're having fun, we're growing, we're in sync, we're aligned, you know, nobody wants to leave the company, it's a well-oiled machine, we're having fun, we're taking risks. It's kind of a Wild West environment, but our differentiation is growing, our prospects are digging us, our customers love us. It's hard to keep up with demand, and that was certainly true back in the days of early Amazon. And if you know any of that story, it's really almost hilarious. And so there are issues. You know, sometimes in acceleration mode, you're not making money yet, or money is leaking because you're not very efficient yet, or you're working too hard, and we'll talk about a lot of that stuff. But it really is a fun time. It is the salad days, as we say. It's the good old days. And what I'd like to do is just give you 5 points based on what companies tend to be going through when they're in acceleration mode, give you 5 points to think about and ponder, some of which may be a little more obvious than others, but I think that they're important to the strategy of your company. And the first one is, I don't know if this is going to be counterintuitive to you or not, but it's something that we really believe in strongly at our place, and that is that momentum beats perfection. So this is especially important to companies in acceleration mode because perfection's far away. One of the things that you can see really marks the acceleration phase is agreement with this statement of ready, fire, aim. And if you're in acceleration mode, there is some of that. It's like we just gotta make decisions. So we're doing things on the fly. We do not tend to overthink things. You can see when we get to the end of the day over into commoditization zone, we're going to talk a lot about this, but there's just no time to overthink things in acceleration mode. And similarly, companies tend to be marked by decisiveness, that you can make a decision in this mode, primarily because you simply have to. When we asked you all if you had to characterize your biggest business challenge in a single word in this phase, you know, time rose to the top. Obviously, growth and market and technology and talent and efficiency, those are all sort of related to those things, but it's just almost by definition, we're growing so fast, we don't have time. And so that's one of the things that we face in this mode. Now, one of the things that's interesting about business is you've all probably heard of this this concept called Six Sigma, which was all the rage 20 years ago. It's still a legit, Six Sigma, and there's Six Sigma black belts. This whole thing about the Six Sigma is 99.9999% perfection, accuracy, or what have you. And that's a really important concept when you're building an airplane, right? Because you can't have 1 in every 10 or 1 in every 100 crash. So you really have to have Six Sigma. That's what they're going through now, the companies that are working on self-driving cars and those sorts of things. There are some categories, healthcare, medicine, where Six Sigma is the watchword. And you really, that's why you have to get FDA approval on a vaccine, and it takes a year, because you're messing with people's lives, and it's really important. Most of the time, however, in companies in acceleration mode, it's not a life or death proposition. Airplanes, self-driving cars, healthcare, life or death. Most of the time, it's not life or death. And so most of the time, momentum really does beat perfection. Six Sigma is a perfection mechanism. But since in acceleration mode, companies tend to be fairly small and fairly closely held, and sometimes everybody can sit in one room and everybody's name, and there's a real sense of mission and vision. Employees tend to be highly in sync with the leadership. There tends to be a lot of alignment on strategy. And these are all things that allow you to pick up the pace. They allow you to move quickly, and they make it okay for you to focus on momentum as opposed to perfection. And this is something that we had to learn really the hard way as a company that, my firm, 25 years ago when we were founded, in the marketing advertising space, the model was typically do a bunch of research. Research, come up with an ad campaign, test it, perfect it, ensure it's going to work, and then launch it. That was kind of the world I grew up in, and it was a real perfection mindset. But we've learned a lot over the past 10 years that, it may not be that important, because you never do get perfect anyway. You never can know. And so instead, focus on improvement. Instead of perfection, focus on improvement. So if you are in sync with leadership, if you are aligned on strategy, if you do operate fairly well and are willing to take creative risks, a little bit of ready, fire, aim is okay. And momentum beats perfection. So the first point I'd like to encourage you with, if you're in acceleration mode, is in our category, it's okay to make mistakes. You're going to have to make up for them somehow. But keep it moving. Keep it moving forward. It's especially important. Now, let me contradict that. Point number 2, obviously, beware speed, growth can kill. So if you think simply in terms of driving a car fast or whatever, it's fun to go fast, right? Momentum beats perfection. But you can also die in a fiery ball of, explosion, because growth can kill. And if you've been around business for any length of time, that's true. How does that manifest itself in acceleration mode? Again, this is one of those, we call them valley charts, that we'll talk a lot about this when we get to commoditization, because it's the same problem but for different reasons. It's difficult to keep up with demand in acceleration mode, again, almost by definition, because you're accelerating so fast that you're working late nights, or using baling wire to stitch the thing together. And the problem that can cause is that you start to shoot yourself in the foot. If your growth outpaces your ability to maintain quality, so this is the dark side of momentum beating perfection. Not life and death, probably, but it could be the life and death of a customer relationship. It could deal with issues of life and death about your reputation. No individual customer interaction is probably that significant, but you don't want to mess with it, right? And so you all remember the movie 101 Dalmatians. We actually studied 101 demolitions, and among the reasons cited for companies failing, this is early stage companies failing, the demolitions. We see 23% lacked the right team, 19% outcompeted. Those are things that relate to growing really fast and not having either the right kind of people or the right number of people or both. And those are big issues. Sometimes when you need to staff up quickly, you make compromises and sacrifices in the kinds of people you want, or you certainly make compromises and sacrifices in training, or you don't have your training figured out yet. And it's just these kind of things that can cause you a problem. I think it's interesting. what do you fear most about the future of your company? The biggest answer that you all gave was nothing, because of course you would. We're in acceleration mode, right? We could do no wrong. It's like we're conquering the world. That changes over time, and it's okay. But if you look around that word, you see things like keeping up and employees and lack of planning and growth and our abilities and capabilities, and they kind of all relate to this whole idea that this is a really fun ride to be on, but it's also kind of scary, because if this roller coaster comes off the track, it's going to be a problem. Often, typically, that manifests itself in the form of staffing. It also can in the form of technology, but typically the first thing that rears its ugly head in acceleration mode is we just don't have enough people, or enough of the right kind of people to do the stuff we need to do, whether that's high impact, sophisticated consulting, which you might be doing, or whether it's stuffing boxes, like in Amazon. Whatever the case, it's difficult to keep up with staffing needs. And it's akin to, we kind of get into physics discussions on all these things. It's akin to driving a car really fast. The faster you drive your car, the more gas you burn per mile, right? And so this is a chart that I found that if you approach light speed, you need infinite energy, which means the faster your company moves, the more energy it takes to make it happen. If it's moving really slowly, you can do it yourself, and you can do it right, and you can do it perfectly. You may not make a lot of money, but you can. The faster your company is moving, the more energy it takes in the form of person hours or time and those sorts of things. And it's a fact of life. It's a fact of physics. So you want to be careful. We all want to travel at light speed, because light speed looks like it's really, really fun. But we're going to burn a lot of gas if we go at light speed. And if we don't have that fuel in the tank, we can end up crashing. So it's just something to be careful about. That as you're struggling to keep up with demand and staffing needs, you want to be careful in acceleration mode. And sometimes you might actually want to slow things down a little bit. There are ways of doing that through pricing, through queues. You don't want to offend customers, but there are strategies to do that. And it might be wise to do. It's counterintuitive, because you want to grow while you can grow, but sometimes it can be a wise thing. So momentum beats perfection. Get the thing rolling, but beware your speed, because growth can kill. One of the ways it can kill, and this is related obviously, is to watch your waste and leakage. And we've seen a lot of this with companies that we've consulted, startups and other companies in the acceleration mode, is you're typically dealing with, you're burning a lot of cash. And in acceleration mode, this is why startups require a lot of capital, and they go to the venture capital markets, because they burn a lot of cash. If you look at your typical product life cycle, we're down here in the development, actually the introduction and early growth mode. And when you're in that mode, often your cash flow is negative. Not always, but often. Even if your cash flow isn't negative, if you're growing really quickly, you're stressing your cash flow. And if you've ever been in a fast growth company, you can feel that. That's where you learn that cash is king, that if you run out of cash, you have a problem. And even on an individual customer basis, we know that this works, that it's different in every industry, and it's a little bit different for every customer. But typically, on day one, when you get a customer, you're negative, right? Your cash flow is negative because you spent money on marketing and sales to acquire that customer. Whether you measure that or not, it's true. So it takes a certain period of time for your customer, your penny profit, if you will, your individual customer cash flow to get to break even and then to positive. Sometimes it's a matter of months, sometimes it's a matter of years in a long-term relationship. And you all know this better than anybody based on the industry that you're in. And so the more customers you add, the more negative cash flow you're going to, or the more negative impact you're going to have on your cash flow. And that's just something that we have to be very careful of. Back to my 101 demolitions, the number one issue being no market need. That's just an ill-founded startup. But the reason that most startups crash is because they run out of cash. You've heard horror stories about startup founders who get crushed, they get squeezed out of the company because they have to acquire so much capital at such favorable terms because they've run out of cash. And that whole expression of, our runway, what's our runway? Those are all reflections of this whole idea of running out of cash. And so what you want to be careful about is waste and leakage. Most companies in acceleration mode would say that they're funding their marketing plan sufficiently. That may or may not be true. As we get to maturation mode, we'll show you why. But it is true that the growth is coming, and so kind of hard to argue with whether you're funding it. But the idea of we're achieving our goals with increasing efficiency needs to be something that you really do begin to focus on, because it's easy in an accelerating company to be inefficient. It's really easy. Whether that's paying people too much when you hire them because you just need to staff up, or ordering too much takeout because you're so busy that you just order it, order the takeout food, and those little kinds of expenses add up, or not managing your office supplies well because you're growing so fast, and you got all these, you've got 18 years worth of Post-it notes just because everybody's ordering it. Those little things add up, and that can happen easily in acceleration mode. And so you really want to begin to watch waste and leakage. I wouldn't take your eye off the ball on the big issue of strategy, but be careful, wherever you can, especially with the big rocks on monitoring cash flow. Point number 4, this is something you may not think a lot about, but it's codify your culture. What do I mean by codify your culture? Well, we've been in the business of correlating corporate culture with growth, or the lack thereof, for the last 15 years. My first book, When Growth Stalls, How It Happens, Why You're Stuck, and What to Do About It, probed this in depth. And one of the things that we discovered was that there are 4 internal cultural dynamics that are really critical to success. And when companies are struggling, typically those 4 dynamics are working against them. The lack of consensus on the team, there's a loss of focus in the marketplace, a loss of nerve, fear takes over, and inconsistency, searching for silver bullet solutions. And on the flip side, when companies are aligned and they're focused and they go to market bravely and with conviction and do it consistently, they're succeeding. So most of the time, companies in acceleration mode are, again, almost by definition in the green, almost by accident too, but almost by definition. But it is inevitable as you work your way around the cycle that you will tip into the red. And that's one of the things that emotionally intelligent management does, is pays really close attention to that. So as we looked at the overall scores for the IIAT membership who took the survey, this is how the group scored on the 4 issues of alignment, focus, nerve, and consistency. You have agency on the left and associate members on the right. And overall, it's good. It's not great, but it's good. It's in the green. Companies in acceleration mode, unsurprisingly, tend to perform better on these scores. So if I'm taking your temperature, you may not be 98.6, but you can come and work out in the club because you're healthy. And that's what we see. And you all are healthy, generally speaking. I'm going to talk a lot more about this stuff in further sessions. However, you want to be careful about this, because one of the things that popped up in the survey was this one. There's a lot of gossip at work. Again, on the commoditization side, the content of that gossip is different. And maybe that's the best way to distinguish it. In commoditization, the gossip is really negative, and it's a real problem. We'll talk about that in a few hours. But there's a lot of gossip at work in acceleration mode too. Is it good gossip? Is there such a thing as good gossip? Is it because everybody knows everybody? Is it because everybody's excited? Is it because people are working late hours? I don't know. But gossip is not a good thing in general. Gossip is a very dangerous thing in general, and so you want to be careful about that. So when we say begin to codify your culture, books have been written, right? There's a whole industry of consultants, corporate culture stuff. I'm not going to get into that in great deal. This is a culture wheel that just kind of highlights what we're talking about, right? Those shared stories and that common language that you have as a company, and your traditions and rituals and artifacts and food and drink and values. All this stuff eventually gets codified. All of it eventually becomes ossified too. That's part of the cycle. But this is stuff that you're inventing this right now. In acceleration mode, these things are being spawned. They're kind of just happening. That every Thursday at lunch you order Chinese food. It just becomes a thing, or whatever the case might be. But you want to begin to codify it, because I don't know if you all are familiar with this, the bar that connects all the wheels on a train. This is really a fascinating concept. It's called a coupling rod. And have you ever wondered why a train has a coupling rod? You know, it's kind of fun to watch when you're a kid as it goes round and round with the wheels go round and round. Well, the coupling rod is there for a very important reason, and that's to keep the train on the tracks, especially as it goes around the corners. Train wheel, unlike tires, which have some give in them, they're rubber. And if you think about it, in a car, you've got rubber tires, which have give, and you have axles, which have give, and suspension systems. So when a car turns a corner, all that stuff helps keep it on track. Train doesn't have that, right? These are iron wheels, metal wheels. They have a lip on the inside. They're all the same size, roughly. And so when a train goes around a corner, the physical forces on it are very different, the inside wheels versus the outside wheels. The coupling rod ensures that the wheels turn at the same rate, and it ensures that the train doesn't go off the track. Are you getting the metaphor here? That you got a bunch of wheels when you're in acceleration mode, a bunch of individual people who are spinning really fast. And it's easy, especially when you come to a corner, if you're going fast, to fly off the tracks. That a corner might be a customer complaint, where one person will deal with it very different than another. The corner might be a cash flow crunch, where one person is paying attention to it much more than the other. All these things tend to happen, and they can derail you quite literally. I mean, no pun intended. They can derail an early company. And so you don't want to worry about it, because it is the good times, but you do want to begin to set down things that codify your culture. At my company, we have two documents. We call them origins and rights and responsibilities. One is sort of the company declaration of independence, like why we exist. And one is more like our constitution, how we're going to live together. And those were written in the first year of our existence, because even though we were very small, we were growing quickly. I just had a sense that as we grew, we've all, I don't want to speak for all of you, but if you've been in business for any length of time, you've probably worked somewhere where there's not so good of a culture, and it's very unpleasant. And my concern when we started was that that would happen to us, especially in an environment with a bunch of smart people. So we wrote down our declaration and our constitution. We began to codify our culture. And of course, that's a continuous process that happens over a long period of time, but it's something that you want to begin to be thinking about in acceleration mode. It's not all, take out pizza and making money. Okay, build hedges. This is actually the last piece, and I think I'm going to spend the most time on this. What does build hedges mean in acceleration mode? Again, it's a little bit counterintuitive. Maybe I'll put it this way. It's foresight. Have the foresight to recognize that you're going to need hedges. Now, in accelerate, this is such a perfect slope on this chart. I mean, look at this. You all, companies in acceleration mode, are more bullish on the future than they were a year ago. Of course you are, right? Of course you are. These are great times, but you want to be careful about it. And I read about, I don't know, it was about a year ago, a great story about when Jeff Bezos, in the fairly early days of Amazon, actually wanted to buy Netflix. And he called Reed Hastings and one of his colleagues up to Seattle for an initial conversation about it. It was really fascinating. And these are some pull quotes. I won't read them, but you can sort of read them as I talk. From the author, this is a book on Netflix, he wrote it, where he says, and Netflix was not a tiny company at this stage, but it was a lot smaller than Amazon. They were still basically selling DVDs. That's what they were doing. So they felt like they, were in a good place, and they were trying to get, more traction in the marketplace. And they had this conversation after the meeting with Jeff Bezos, because they were a little bit scared. They're like, you know what? As soon as Bezos starts figuring out how to sell DVDs, he's gonna kill us. He's gonna crush us. And so the conversation, this is on the airplane back, they said, we got to figure out how to get out of selling DVDs. At that time, Netflix sold TV. That's what they did. They sold DVDs. They talked about this, putting our eggs in one basket. And Reed asked the guy, what's our percentage that comes from rental? It was 3%. 3% of Netflix's revenue came from rental. It was all DVDs. And they decided that they had to get into the rental business. So this is like foresight beyond foresight. Here's a company that's doing very well selling DVDs, Renting them is 3% of their business, but they saw what was coming and they said, we actually need to get more into rental than into sales. And I just think that's fascinating. The courage that it took to do that and the foresight that it took by looking around, talk about building a hedge. We're going to come back to Netflix in a minute, but give them an A+ for this one. So you're in this mode right now where your differentiation is growing. You're kind of, you know, winning. Your margins are probably pretty good on it. Customers are valuing it. They're coming back. They're referring their friends. Whatever the case may be. But remember that the wheel turns, and the wheel turns ever faster, increasingly quickly. We talked about this a little bit, I think, in the original presentation, where in our grandfather's day, or your father's day, depending on how old you are, and it's not being sexist, it kind of was your grandfather's day in the work world. Time moves slowly. The disruption cycle was still there, but it moved more like the hands on a clock, where you can't really notice it turning. And that's why they spent one career at one company, or certainly one career in one industry. Baby boomers, we come along, and everybody told us you're going to have 2 careers. And that was a reflection of the cycle moving more quickly, even though we didn't really know it. You're going to have 2 careers, so prepare for that. Now with millennials and Generation Z, we don't really even talk in terms of a number of careers. We talk in terms of capabilities, because you just have to be flex. You have to be able to flex. That's because the wheel of disruption is turning ever faster and is picking up velocity every day. Back in the 1920s, the average company on the S&P 500 was there for 65 years. Today, they last on the S&P 500 for about 10. And that number is decreasing and declining. Airbnb, 15 years ago, was even 15 years ago, yeah, it was, maybe a little bit more, comes along and invents this new way of travel. And initially it was totally dismissed by Hilton and Marriott and the big hotel providers. And here's Airbnb crushing it, right? Acceleration mode, getting into maturation mode. That's when they launched the business travel piece of it. And they're just crushing it. And they're like, the sky's the limit. And nobody's paying, none of the big players are paying attention to them. And so they're just crushing it until one day Marriott wakes up and says, wait a minute. These guys are really eating into our business. So Marriott copies Airbnb's model. They acquired a company, actually tied it to their frequent stay program, renamed it Bonvoy. And now Marriott has an offering every bit as robust as Airbnb, but you can use Marriott points in it, which is something that Airbnb doesn't have. So here's a company that was crushing it in acceleration mode, and now is facing really stiff competition, to say nothing of the market tectonic that COVID represents, that we all know what that's done to the travel marketplace. So even a fast-growing, can do no wrong company like Airbnb had to build hedges. Netflix too, right? We just talked about them, how they got an A+ for that. And Netflix for the past 10 or 15 years has been growing like crazy and just crushing it. Well, here's an old stalwart. Disney comes along and sees that and says, you know, we can do that too. And now Disney gets into the business, and Disney is putting the heat on Netflix. Netflix's innovation was a business model, right? Renting DVDs and then eventually streaming. Disney had all the content. And so Disney says, we got all the content, we can match the streaming. And they launch Disney Plus, and of course we know there's Hulu and Amazon Prime and Apple, and everybody's getting into the marketplace. So even in these category-killing categories and industries where you have companies like Netflix and Airbnb, they need to build hedges. We all need to build hedges. You all will appreciate this. What's the right age to start saving for retirement? Right? Probably 5 or 6. I tell my kids, who are all adults now, you know, first job you get, first thing you do, maximize your contribution to, you know, your retirement plan, company match and all that. And you all, of all people, are financially responsible, so you understand that. Most people don't start early enough saving for retirement. You know that. Most people, most companies, I don't know if I can say most, you could say most. There's a lot of underinsured people and a lot of underinsured, unprotected companies out there. We know that. Insure yourself. If you're in acceleration mode, invest in your retirement. Insure yourself. Start to build those important hedges. In this time of COVID, which is really fascinating, this is a study that just came out from McKinsey and Company. Everybody says innovating is really important, continual innovation. but very few companies, you can see on the right side of the chart, have the expertise, resources, and commitment to pursue new growth successfully, especially you in acceleration mode, because you're kind of busy right now, trying to meet your customers' needs. But keep an eye on the future and building hedges. This is a little bit of a confusing chart, but I'll just direct your attention to the blue bars on the left. Today, which is time period B, the number one priority being innovation has gone way down from 55% pre-crisis to and the 57% during the recovery to 23% today. Everybody's focused over on the right side of the chart with focusing on the core, focusing on being efficient. All those things are important, but not to the exclusion of innovation and building hedges. And this is just another chart from that report, which I love this one because it's just so easy to read and cool. That if you continue to innovate through crises, and these are a bunch of historical examples here, you will outperform your peers going forward. So managing a company is not an easy thing to do. You got to keep a lot of things in mind, and you have to be able to compartmentalize. So the message here is don't hesitate, but iterate. And I'm back to the whole idea of momentum beating perfection. And one of the things that really helped form our judgment in our consulting practices was looking at the world of software development and startups and the whole concept of agile development. I don't know if you've read any books about it, but the whole idea behind agile development is that momentum beats perfection, is that get an MVP, minimum viable product out there, get it into the field, test it, collect consumer feedback, reiterate, quite literally, reiterate, get it into the field, test it. And agile development is about keeping, things moving, sprints, innovate. This is what we're talking about here. Don't hesitate, iterate on your business model, iterate on ideas you have. This is a little bit of a busy slide, but I pulled this out of a report from the World Advertising Resource Center, which has some fascinating stuff. And the headline is the point here, that COVID-19 is accelerating the need for digital transformation, because by force, many companies, we've all been forced to innovate. I mean, we're doing a conference here online, right? We've all been forced to adjust and innovate. And as we're doing this, we're learning a lot. So it's actually making the wheel of transformation spin even more quickly. And on the right there, you see, the consumer. You could put client in there, business client in there. There's a lot of different ways to consider innovation, from marketing to product to supply chain to sales channels. It's incumbent upon us to do it. Perhaps one of the reasons you're in acceleration mode is because you've done it. Don't stop. Don't stop. You should always be devoting a portion of your time, effort, energy, and resources to continued innovation and enhancements. And McKinsey cited just a handful of examples from the last 60 days, 90 days maybe, of what companies have done, getting an ad campaign to market overnight, basically. Birdseye changing its manufacturing and marketing strategy because of the incredible rush to grocery stores and supermarkets for people to stock up. MasterCard, which the whole thing is the priceless experiences, priceless, that's their campaign, and they've centered that all around experiences, right? Like going to Bora Bora with your 16-year-old daughter, whatever the case may be. They've rejiggered that to digital experiences while physical experiences are not so possible. And then Unilever getting a new product to market. Lots and lots of ways to not hesitate and innovate, and it's incumbent upon us to build those hedges. I come from certainly the marketing mindset and the marketing perspective, and the way we look at it is marketing is not little m marketing, like marketing department, marketing plan. Marketing is big M marketing, that's what we call it, which is the marketing worldview, as this so wonderfully describes, providing business solutions that addresses people's needs. That's what it's really about. That's what it's always been about, and that's what it will always be about, even as we go through this cycle. So lots of different ways to do that, from formal research and big R&D departments, which most of you probably don't have and can't afford, neither can we, to innovative R&D exercises, to carving out an afternoon or setting aside a weekend to do a retreat where you can do these collision sessions where you collide lenses, We'll talk more about this too in subsequent webinars today because it becomes even more relevant. Or commonly held orthodoxies. This is a really great exercise. We've done it at our place where you're like, what are the things that we know are true? And write them all on a whiteboard and then question them. Say, is it really true? Making analogies to other industries, we do this all the time. You can learn so much. If we were Netflix, how would our model be different? If we were Amazon, how would our model be different? If we were, IBM, or if we were Kroger, how would our model be different? That can be a really helpful exercise. And then even the artificial constraints thing, which can be terrific. There's a lot of these, right? They're available online, they're available everywhere. There's a lot of different exercises, but I would encourage you to build hedges now while you can. So as we summarize this, obviously enjoy the ride and don't worry about being perfect all the time, but do worry about falling off a cliff. Do worry about the rocket crashing back to Earth. You got to make sure you have enough fuel to be able to do what you're doing. All of this is a balance. Watch your waste and leakage. Codify your culture. I can't emphasize that enough. That might be one of the hedges that you build, honestly, because culture can be a hedge. If you look at the airlines, for example, Southwest Airlines has a very strong positive culture compared to Delta and American and the other airlines. And when things go bad, that matters. It really matters because your employees are much more willing to stick with you then. So that can be one of the hedges that you build. And then focus on building hedges. And if there's one more thing I would encourage you to do during acceleration mode is really to enjoy it. I've been in it multiple times over the course of my career, and it's easy to pull your hair out. It's easy to get frustrated, especially if you're lacking sleep or worrying about your cash flow. But boy, when you look back on it, it's fun. It really is an enjoyable time. It's going to come and it's going to go. You can't stay in acceleration mode forever. So while you're in it, enjoy it. I would really encourage you to do that. So acceleration, that's our presentation for this morning. We do have the maturation phase coming up in about 15 minutes, it looks like. But I would be happy to address any questions. Let me see if there are any that are submitted. Or Matt, if you want to take the moderation back and ask them, that would be terrific. Or not. This is why we have to innovate. All right. Well, thank you all for attending. It doesn't look like there's any questions. I don't know if we've temporarily lost Matt. I appreciate you being here. I encourage you to join us for the maturation session at the top of the hour, and we will see you then. Thank you.